Excellent. So thank you, everybody, for your patience as I try and get my life together so that we can have a wonderful session. This is so much fun because you guys are on my little screen tonight. So I have like all these teeny tiny little faces. Um, but it is good to see as much as I can of all of you. Um, so we are going to shake things up a little bit. I know we said we're going to do equity tonight, and we definitely are. However, okay, so you know when you try and organize yourself and you do a really good job to the point that you mess things up? So it turns out I have two presentations. One is called Twice Exceptional 102, The Social Emotional Needs of 2E Kids. And the other one is called Twice Exceptional 102, Addressing the Needs of the Social Emotional Needs of 2E Kids. So remember last week when I said like, I felt like I was missing something and I was trying to tell you guys something and I just couldn't like figure it out. Yeah, because I had the wrong presentation. So I am going to do just a piece of the presentation that we didn't get to last week. If I do cover things that we talked about, just go ahead and remind me, and we will skip past that part. So right now, I'm just going to scroll myself where I need to be. So we did talk about the difference between Twice Exceptional and GIF and GTLD. We talked about our curriculum. Oh, see, I did it again. I pulled up the wrong one. It's a good thing I'm fun because my own executive functioning is just a nightmare tonight. Or possibly in general. Okay. All right, let's get this show started. All right, so I think that you guys, can see my screen. It looks like you can see my screen. Awesome. So one thing that we did talk about last week was that we talked a little bit about the misdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. And one part that we talked about was misinterpretation. And so the section I didn't go over last week that's in this presentation is really when we're talking about how we can misinterpret symptoms or how we can misinterpret behaviors. And so what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison on the difference that we can see between gifted and twice exceptional kids. And I think, like always, we want the caveat that, of course, we are talking very broad profiles. We know when we're talking about individuals that we will see a lot of range of differences, but this is very much in general. So when we talk about the asynchronous development, and if you went through your asynchronous development part of the module, we know that with asynchronous development, it's talking about how our students can mature at different rates. And within like a typical student, you know, they're typical because their age matches their social emotional development, matches their academic development. It's all within kind of a bubble of what we would expect. Gifted students, however, will develop at different rates based on where their areas of giftedness are, but also their giftedness doesn't necessarily keep up with, say, their maturity. Their ability to understand a topic does not match their ability to cope with the topic. So one of the big exceptions that examples that I often use, you know, children like dinosaurs. I like dinosaurs. I hope you like dinosaurs. If you would like to share your favorite dinosaur in the chat, that would make my day. My kid loves dinosaurs. But when my kid learned about the extinction event when she was 3, she absolutely lost it, and she lost it for a while because she could not comprehend that the dinosaurs were gone and not coming back. And, if the dinosaurs went extinct, were people going to go extinct too? And she was into space and she knew about meteors and asteroids. And so it was a lot. So it wasn't just like, oh, she's sad the dinosaurs are dead, but it was like actually like talking her way through what a mass extinction event meant. Another example I have is another friend of mine's child who was really into ocean animals. And somewhere along the way, he got a hold of information about the Great Plastic Toilet and how it was, the damage it was causing. And he just couldn't handle the animals dying and the fact that it was people's fault. And he went on like a, plastic boycott. And he was, I think, 4 at the time. So there are things that they're comprehending, but they're just not emotionally available or mature enough to handle what that content is. This also can sometimes lead to things that might look like depression or look like anxiety. And it could be depression and anxiety because they don't have the wherewithal to cope with the magnitude of some of the things that they understand or believe. There's a great short clip in there that talks about how a kid is feeling like how a kid can be 6 and 12 and 2 and 35, like kind of all at the same time. And even though it's not about specifically asynchronous development, if you've read Sandra Cisneros's short story 11, she has a great description about when she's talking about what it is to be 11, and that when you're 11, you're not just 11, but you're also 1 and 2 and 3 and all the ages that came before. And with asynchronous development, it's very similar, except you're also ages you've never been. And so I think that helps kind of with some of the metaphor pieces. Oh, a couple of you got the right answer. The best dinosaur, by the way, the answer is the Triceratops. Not just because it's my namesake, but because it's just the best dinosaur, right? When we talk about our twice exceptional students, we're talking about students that not only have that asynchronous profile, but we're talking about students whose social emotional skills tend to be below average. It's not just that they are maybe developmentally appropriate for their age, but their cognitive abilities are higher, but their social emotional development is not appropriate for their age. And so their social emotional needs are greater because they need to kind of make up the distance as well as then kind of catch up to where their cognitive abilities are. And then we're also talking about the impairment in domains. The next one we talk about are those, the intensities and the overexcitabilities. And, we talked last week a little bit about how there's different thoughts out there about what intensities and excitabilities really mean in terms of giftedness. But it really is talking about that being able to act or feel with intensity. So it's sometimes can look like obsession. It can sometimes look like rigidity and over focus. But again, what we're looking at is not only do they feel those intensities, but actually those intensities are impacting their ability to access. Okay, Zoom just popped up and said it couldn't hear me. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, well then you're wrong, Zoom. I'm just gonna ignore you. If you can't make wild symbols or text me somebody because yeah, I don't know. I think I can hear me. So again, so we were talking about how it's not just about supporting the gifted need or helping them manage the intensity, because the behaviors that we're seeing are either disordered or more highly impacted, and it is impacting their access to education. This is where my little happy thing on overexcitability is, but you guys have seen this in the module, so I'm going to keep going. So gifted students sometimes can have trouble finding friends. Again, we're not looking at like asocial because they are, or antisocial because they don't want to make friends, but often it's the kids who they have such high interest and specific interest and depth of knowledge of a topic that their own peers don't really understand what it is that they're talking about. And so they either tend to gravitate towards adults, they gravitate towards other children who are similar to them. But once they find their people, they begin to adapt more, and we see more of those, like what we might call normal or typical social behaviors. Twice exceptional students also are often looking for their people. They struggle with the interactions, but their interactions, oops, their struggles and interactions go beyond just not finding their people, because even when they find their people, they still have trouble sometimes connecting, making, developing, and really maintaining, especially in the long-term friendships. Their social pragmatics can be impacted. One thing I talk about frequently is part of what we do, what I do when I work with my students, especially my students with autism and ADHD, is it's not just about saying, you know, that other people, that it's okay that you're wrong sometimes and other people are right sometimes, but it's having to teach them that, like, other people's opinions have value too. And sometimes you actually have to listen to what other people say and know you're not the smartest person on the planet. Other people have value that they can add to a conversation, and really teaching them perspective taking and reciprocal conversation, and how to accept and incorporate other people's ideas, and also be able to hear feedback for their own ideas. Understanding the difference between critical thinking and critical feedback versus criticism. Um, so then we also will talk about the perfectionism. We did talk about this a little bit last week. We didn't talk much about the imposter syndrome, but imposter syndrome is really, in the shortest way to make it, they don't believe, the gifted students might not believe they are as gifted or as smart or as able as they actually are. And it can lead to self-esteem issues. It can lead to underperformance. We might call these students our underachieving, gifted underachievers. They very quickly will associate smart means easy, because if school is not challenging for them, they're not developing skills. And then when they find something that is challenging, they tend to shut down because, well, if I was really smart, this would be easy. For twice exceptional students, we see something similar, but again, we also see this leading to internalizing and externalizing behaviors such as shutting down, self-sabotage, refusal, self-harm can be a part of this. So it's beyond just the underperformance and doubt, and it leads to more active negative behaviors. One thing that we also talk about, especially with twice exceptional students, but really with all gifted students, is the idea of hitting the wall. So what hitting the wall means is, if we have a typical student or even a typical special education student, when they're coming to school, school is not necessarily easy for them. They have to learn the content, they have to learn the behaviors, they have to learn the expectations. And if they are struggling, they learn how to have productive struggle, how to overcome things that are difficult for them, and how to move forward. And they develop grit in the face of adversity or challenge. What happens frequently with gifted and twice exceptional kids is that they come in, and yes, they learn the behaviors, and they may or may not learn them, but they learn behaviors and expectations, but they don't learn content. They're not challenged in their thinking. They don't have the opportunity to engage in productive struggle. And so what happens, and this is especially true for our gifted kids who get straight A's and are fairly well behaved, is they just glide on through. And then all of a sudden something's hard. And this usually it happens middle school, mid high school, or even for someone like me going into college, where the first time something is truly challenging, you're older, and your whole experience to that date has been, this is easy, this is easy, this is easy. And unlike the students who had to work to have understanding and had to work to overcome, even being on grade level or above grade level, they've developed skills. They have developed a sense of self-worth in the process of productive challenge. and our gifted kids haven't, and they have no resiliency when something is hard for the first time and they have already had 5, 6, 7, 10 years of school under their belt, and they're suddenly being faced with challenge. And so it is something that we want to keep a lookout for. And high school teachers, you guys are like in that prime setting right now for us to see some of those behaviors coming out, for especially for students who really have breezed through elementary and middle school. All right, this one we did, and I think, so this is something that is in the modules as well. And it was published in 2015. This was a collaborative Venn diagram with AEI and the autism unit coming up with this image about how different, how disabilities are interacting in different ways. And we're looking specifically at specific learning disabilities, ADHD, and autism. These intersections can be true whether or not the student is gifted, but the important part really is seeing where some of those overlaps are. And this is where that term of neurodiversity becomes so important. When I talk to parents about it, you know, we want to try and use parent-friendly behavior. So usually what I end up saying is, you know, yes, it's autism, but it's kind of like autism with an ADHD flavor, or it's a specific learning disability with a little sprinkle of ADHD on top. Like, you know, try and help them to understand, because there are times where we have overlap, and it doesn't mean that the coding is wrong, but it means some of the behaviors are similar. Now, sometimes it's also possible that there's two different diagnoses going on there. And so that's when, if you start looking at, say, something that is just SLD, but you don't like, so you have difficulty with decoding and fluency, difficulty with spelling and grammar, but you don't have hyperactivity, or you don't have impulsiveness. You don't have particular struggles with the organization of writing. It's more of the actual like mechanics of writing. Well, then we're looking at two separate things, and that really falls under the SLD. But when we talk about the ADHD piece, and then what it has in common with specific learning disabilities, we get this whole list here. Being verbal and articulate, grasping concepts, having a slower processing speed is actually a part of that, both of those profiles. So the important thing with this graphic is really showing where those overlaps are. This is a very well accepted image. You will see it reprinted very frequently, as recently as 2021. I know that one of the publications that came out has reprinted this, because it really has kind of captured where these overlaps are. And the other thing I sometimes will tell parents is, yeah, it's a Venn diagram, but it's the kind of Venn diagram where it's sometimes gifted in ADHD, SLD, and autism. Sometimes those circles are almost a complete single circle, even though they're 4 or 5 different areas. And so Twice Exceptional really is about those intersections. Here's my executive functioning. I know we talked about it last week. I did find all my, the breakdown that I prefer to talk about. So I want to talk especially about one thing we didn't really talk about a lot last week was metacognition. And metacognition can also be called, especially when we're talking about introducing twice exceptional kids to who they are as learners, is what we call demystification. Our kids are living their lives. They understand that they're struggling. They understand that they have strengths. Whether or not they can put together all those pieces is another thing. But very, very frequently with our students, because they have the ability to comprehend things, even things that are beyond their maturity level, we can often explain to them more about who they are as learners, what their profiles are, and help them find their strengths, and then teach them how to use their strengths. So the metacognition, the learning about learning process, is very important for our twice exceptional learners, because it needs to be taught explicitly. I'm sure all of you could tell me, you know, am I primarily a visual thinker? Am I primarily an auditory thinker? And, you know, we know from more modern research everybody isn't everything. That's why multiple modalities work best. Because even if you do primarily prefer visual learning, you still benefit from auditory learning, which is why we put them together. If you prefer kinesthetic learning, as you see, I'm really happy. Still in a chair that turns. And I work really hard to try and keep myself straight. But I mean, I am very much a moving person when I'm trying to learn or explain things. That doesn't mean I can't learn visually. It doesn't mean I can't learn auditorily. It just means that kinesthetic is something that brings a sense of calm and balance to my learning. Explaining that to our students and really expressing it and teaching them about it is a really important part of working with our twice exceptional kids. And then we did talk some about when they get into the older grades. That's a lot of the, that's really when we start tweaking it and talking about as self-advocacy, because we're going from teaching them about their learning to teaching them how to teach others about their learning, which is a skill that they will need as they progress and if they do go to college or post-secondary. All right, I'm going to do a fast click. We talked about that. We talked about that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, because I think yeah, that was a real fast scroll. Oh, you're gonna have to say that for me. Micropachycephalosaurus.
Micropachycephalosaurus.
Nice. Sounds like a small elephant dinosaur.
He actually pronounced it for me the first time also. And also explained to me that although it's the longest named dinosaur, that it's not the largest dinosaur. And he told me how many syllables were in it. So
excellent.
That's dinosaurs are his thing. So yeah, that's why it's my favorite.
I'm fairly sure my child's is a pterodactyl, but it's only because she can screech like one. And I have called her pterodactyl for a very long time. And there is not a small chance that we are possibly going to hear some pterodactyl screams before this class is over. Excellent. So that's a great question, Taylor. What happens when those kids do hit the wall and they do struggle? And I think that there are some short-term and long-term answers. In the short term, we want to get them unstuck. We might come back and have them, help them break it down. What is it that you do know? Where are we hitting a barrier? I'm not frozen. I don't know if anybody else feels frozen right now. Sorry, Tamara, just you. So in the short term, we want to get them moving again. We want to get them engaged. And so we might have them, take it back. You're stuck here, but what did we do before we got here, before you got stuck? What is it that you can explain? Really encourage them to own it. If they're at that point where I know nothing, I'm not doing any of it, none. Sometimes just total distraction, like, okay, you know what? Today is not the day we're going to learn this. Let's do something else right now, and then we can revisit it later. And if they scream they're never going to do it again, that's okay too. Let it go. That is one of those times that when a student is stuck, you don't want to fight the fight, because they are completely shut down to learning anything about it. In the long term, that's where some of our direct instruction comes in. That is where sometimes we will give them topics of interest that are challenging. And even things as simple as, for me, like art. Like, I always want to do well with art, but I cannot do art. Except it turns out I can do art. I just was really stubborn about it. And so challenging myself, actually one of my master's programs required us to take a class in fine arts, and not just like the history of fine art, which is what I thought I was going to get to take, but instead I had to take oil painting. it actually turns out that when I'm taught and I have the opportunity and the time, I can actually produce something. But it was frustrating and it was a lot of work. But at the end of the day, I knew I was being graded on my effort and not my actual paintings, which gave me permission to try things. It gave me permission to go outside my comfort zone. And because I was being challenged in something that I thought was interesting and I knew I wasn't going to be successful at from moment one, it gave me that opportunity of productive struggle. In our classrooms, especially if our students have resource classes, resource can give us that opportunity sometimes. Our pre-pandemic, our middle school program did a lot of enrichment work. And it was actually part of our program that our students would have an executive functioning based assignment each month where it was based on some sort of theme. And they had to plan and execute a project and they could do whatever they wanted. I came in at one point and mostly the theme was science, although some of them had stretched it. One person said the only science she cared about was brain science and she did something psychology based. Yes, Tamir, I see you. She was able to, she ended up writing a play about like, it was a one-person show, except that it was like all the voices that were competing in the person's head, not in the terms of like schizophrenia, but more just, when you have all those, the devil, the angel, the this, the that, and all the things going on. And she wrote a play based on that. In the same marking period, somebody else built a roller coaster, which was awesome because if you tweaked it the wrong way, it went like flying across the media center. I loved it. So, but part of the challenge for our kids was deciding what they were going to do, figuring out what science standards they were going to be addressing, doing the research for their projects, and then actually building the projects. And I believe one of the rules was they couldn't buy anything. So, building a roller coaster when you can't buy anything takes a lot of beg, borrow, and steal. And it was those opportunities because there were social skills involved. There was executive functioning planning involved. There was long-term and short-term goals involved. And it was also a couple times a week during resource where they could just not think about school because this was, of course, not a learning opportunity. This was just fun. And it gave them that time to build some of that resiliency. We obviously, again, we're scheduled to do things like that, but truly there's nothing that says that we can't do that in a resource class. I know that most resource classes are assumed or treated as homework help, as study hall, but technically the purpose of the resource classes is for us to address student goals and needs and to support student learning. And if what's going to support student learning is not doing their homework and instead building some of these skills or taking a couple times a week to build these skills, it's okay because that's what our specialized instruction is for. Yeah, I don't know where the rest of that sentence went, but any questions? I know that was like a short 25-minute wrap up of last week. Cool. As always, I am happy to answer questions as they pop up, but I want to move us into our next topic area, which is equity. And my guess is that we're going to roll equity a little bit into next week. So everything's going to kind of shift. And what's going to happen is not much actually, because my last unit that we have is actually not a full 2-hour unit. So anything that gets squished can kind of just get compacted down into that last section. So yeah, I promise you guys aren't going to miss anything. I just wasn't sure where my messing up time was going to happen. So I planned for it. I planned for my extended time. So one of the things I like to start with is when we talk about the profile of a twice exceptional student, things that are not part of the profile of a twice exceptional student is they are not necessarily male, they don't have to be white, and they do not have to be wealthy. I understand And when I look around my classroom, sometimes I do understand that that is what our classes look like. And like everything else that is a mess with education when it comes to race and socioeconomic status, um, that's a big part of the issue, right? The parents who can afford the lawyers, the parents who can afford advocates, and the parents who can afford to be in the know are the ones who are in the know, and they make the most noise, and their kids are the ones who end up getting more attention, which is not to say that that they aren't appropriate for my program or appropriate for identification. But what happens is it takes up so much space that we don't always get to the kids who don't have the parents to advocate. If nothing else from my class, when I talk about what to walk away with, what I charge all of you with is being that voice in your school, being that advocate for students who don't otherwise have the opportunity, or for families that don't know that they can advocate for themselves. I cannot be everywhere at once, even though I support all 207 schools. I'm sure you guys know I haven't been to all your schools yet. Part of what I want us to walk away with is that understanding of the kids who get missed. We understand why they get missed. We talked about why they are missed or misdiagnosed from a psychology standpoint, lay psychology standpoint. If any of my psychologists are out there, I do not pretend I'm a psychologist, and I do not pretend that I tell everything about everything. But at least it's an overview of how we can misunderstand ADHD or anxiety. But these are the kids who are missed because we know that when an African-American male and a white male have the same scores and the same behaviors, the white male is more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD and put into gifted or twice exceptional programs. And the African-American male is more likely to be labeled a behavior problem or have an emotional disabilities diagnosis and end up in more behavior-based settings. And the giftedness is either not recognized or ignored. So just want to give you guys some common language to talk about when we're talking about equity. One thing we talk about is access, and we talk about access a lot, but specifically access is thought about when we're talking about equity and gifted education is, are there program opportunities, whether we call them gifted or advanced learning opportunities? Are there opportunities available for all students? How are students identified to have access to those programs? And does access and participation in a program match the relative makeup of the population accessing the program as a whole? So that's super crazy sounding. What it means is a little bit like we looked at with the MCPS numbers the other night. On the whole, MCPS does okay when it comes to most populations. However, when we get into, say, a particular program or a particular school, do we also match the makeup of that? This is the door that I walked into when I first started in Twice Exceptional, which I think is one of the reasons why the whole topic is very near and dear to me. I was standing out in the hall one day at Northwood, and one of our paras walked by and glanced in my classroom. It was resource. And she said, "Miss Jackson, how is it that you have the only white class in all of Northwood?" And I said, "No, I don't." "Oh, yeah, I do." I would never think that I would ignore or miss that, but I did. And as soon as she said it to me, I was like, "You're right, and that's a problem." And I even said that to her. And so that became a journey for myself. And Kristen Lotney was my co-teacher, my co-program person at the time. And so Kristen and I sat down and we started looking into what the literature said about this. We started looking into our own population, and we started doing some really deep number dives. We looked at the population of Northwood as a whole. We looked at the population of the DCC, because we do know that our makeup gets changed sometimes a little bit because it's For those of you who don't know, the DCC are 5 high schools in Down County where the kids can pick which of the schools they go to. So unlike where it's strictly neighborhood schools, we have a lot more movement in our area. And so we wanted to look at the DCC as a whole because we pull most of our students in the Twice Exceptional program from the DCC. And then we wanted to look at Northwood itself. And then we also wanted to look at the district. And what we found was at the time, white students made up 23% of the Northwood population, and they made up 99.3% of the Twice Exceptional program. Now, I've already told you, I'm not good at math, but I know there's a difference between 99.3 and 23. I do know that. And so our next question was why? How did the kids get here? Why did this happen? Well, almost every single one of our students came, starting most of them in elementary school, and they just moved along the ranks and came up together, which meant that they were all basically being identified when they were in elementary school. I know I can't do anything as a high school teacher about elementary school. So my next question was, well, how else do kids get in to the programs? I talked to the person who was in my position at the time. We had some conversations around it, and a lot of it was, as I said, parents push, parents were there, parents could afford outside assessments. Twice Exceptional was not quite as well known as it was. At the time, it was strictly GTLD. So we were only looking for gifted kids with specific learning disabilities. We had all these things coming into play that was leading to the situation that we had. And the 2 African-American boys that we did have in the program, my 0.7%, both had specific learning disabilities, and they both had specific learning disabilities in reading. They were not behavior problem children. They were very kind, athletic. They didn't have social skills issues. They were very well liked across the school. So they were kids that wouldn't have been labeled otherwise as something else. So then our next question to ourselves was, okay, we know why this is happening, at least from where we are sitting in the high school. So our next question is, well, what makes a difference between who's in the Twice Exceptional program and who is not? And we found that what made the difference was they had walked in the door in the Twice Exceptional program and nobody thought about it otherwise. We looked at what their schedules were, and we found that the difference between Twice Exceptional and not Twice Exceptional was whether or not they got support in their honors classes. And so we looked at all of our special education students who were taking 2 or more honors classes or AP classes who were not in supported sections. And across the board, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but across the board, our children of color were in non-supported honors classes, and our children and our white students were. So that was our first indicator. Our second indicator was to look at kids who were close or maybe in one honors class, talk to their case managers, talk to their teachers. And a lot of times what we got was, well, I think they could do honors, but they really need blah, blah, blah support. They really need this, they really need that. And we just don't do that in the honors classes. And I said, well, I do that in my honors classes. So again, there was that clear space. And a lot of times the teacher would say, well, yeah, but they're not in the Twice Exceptional program. And it was like, yeah, but why aren't they in the Twice Exceptional program? So all of this is to say, Kristen and I sat down and we read every IEP for every 9th grader, 10th grader, and 11th grader at Northwood back in 2014-15. Sorry, seniors didn't read the seniors because they were on their way out anyway. And we categorized the students into basically 3 categories. Category 1 were students who were in 2 or more honors classes and would benefit from support and might be able to take additional classes. Category 2 were kids who were in at least 1 honors class. And somebody had said, we really think with support, they could go further. And then category 3 was, we're not really sure about these kids. And so, and then we had students where we all agreed, like, honors was not right for them. They were appropriately placed with LAD. And those students we put to the side for a minute because we already had 3 categories of student to deal with. So once we had the kids narrowed down based on the IEPs, then we started digging into psych reports. And we started moving students over. And it took a lot of schedule rearranging and some very unhappy administrators. But within the year, we made some significant moves. So I'm going to ask you guys to throw in the chat. Like I said, we were really far. We are 99.3, 99.7% white and 0.7% everything else. How much progress do you think we made in the next year? I see a 50-50. Keep throwing them in there because I like these answers. NAGC. So let me put this up as a presentation. All right. So I will give you a quick hint in that we got accepted for NAGC in 2017 to present our findings. So I'm going to just tell you it was at least a little bit of good news. So really what we talked about was how we were using growth mindset to consider our students. And part of it was because growth mindset was the buzzword that year. So this is the special education population for Northwood in 17-18. This is the whole school, this is special ed, and this is GTLD. So this is kind of what we started talking about. This is that lovely pie chart I showed you guys the other day. I made it, that it used to be a line graph. I like the pie chart better. So we just talked about all this. So here were our targets, and we talked about our targets of like who was here. If you said what was our 1%, what was our 12.5%, and what was our 25%, it meant that we would be at 224 and 48 to start. And this is where we were. And then by 2017-18, this is about where we thought we would be. If you look over here, you can tell that our LAD students in honors classes number starts going down dramatically, and our number of students in GTLD starts going up. This is the pathway that we developed to consider our students. And these are our results. So from in the first year, those of you who said 50-50, we were 50% white and 50% everybody else. In 16, we see, again, more change. What had happened in 17 was word got out about our program, and we had a huge influx of Orthodox Jewish students from Berman Academy. Berman has since changed how they do their special education program, but at the time, the person who was running it had left. They hadn't put in a new person yet, and we had a large influx of Orthodox Jewish students. But if you put the Orthodox Jewish students who came purposely for the program aside for a minute, you see all of the other numbers have shifted to represent more of what our school is. I will also tell you our American Indian population numbers are going to look weird because we had one American Indian student in the school, and he was in my program. So my videos are not going to work, but these are the students that we moved over. So Alex was a student who had been coded for a specific learning disability. She still, even going into college, was reading on about a third or fourth grade level. But what, like we've said with the other students, her thinking was amazing, and her ability to attain concept was really amazing. But because her reading was so impacted, her writing was impacted as well. And she had a lot of anxiety around looking different in front of her peers. And so a lot of times for her, it meant staying in the on-level class and not stretching herself in order that she would not stand out too much. She was in AP Lang by her senior year. It was her only AP class, and it was a huge stretch for her. But she did a really amazing job. Kobe is one of my favorite kids, and he would not have a video, so I got quotes from him. Where he said joining GTLD was right for me because it helped me with my assignments and gave me support and honors. Being a part of the program might help me after high school by teaching me to advocate for myself and turning things in on time. I still don't think he turns in things on time. We also talked about some non-traditional characteristics of gifted kids. Kobe was an amazing leader. This picture is from his junior year. By his senior year, he was captain of the drum line when we won, I believe that was the year we won state titles for the drum line. And Kobe was the captain or co-captain of the group. Oh, there we go, second captain. He was first captain his senior year, and he played 4 instruments. He was our student who, when we said, Kobe, what is it that you actually like? English was not the answer. And so with him, we ended up putting him in on-level English classes so that he could take honors and AP science and math classes. And it was one of the first times as a program that we said, being twice exceptional doesn't require you to be twice exceptional in all the classes. Let's find out what they're interested in. Let's find out what they're good at, and let's really try and tailor the program to meet their needs. The other student who's not on here that I like to talk about, another amazing student, and I had him in 10th grade, Khalil. We moved him into honors English in 10th grade, and he did not do particularly well. And at the end of second semester, or at the end of first semester, he came to myself and my co-teacher and he said, I love being here, but this is too much for me. I can't hack it. I feel bad all the time. I'm doing my best and I know it's not enough. What can I do? And so we met with his case manager, we met with the English teacher, we met with the whole English team. And we said, and we met with his mom, and we said, here's the deal. We hear what you're saying and we want to honor what you're saying. We also want to honor the work that you've put in, and we don't want to tank your grade because you tried something that was hard. Based on the work that you gave us in our class, it's a C or a D, but when you look at it compared to what on-level students are doing, it's closer to a C or a B. So we had the on-level teachers grade his work. We gave him that grade for the honors class because it would have completely screwed up his transcript to try anything else. If you don't know about high school transcripts, oh my God. And then we moved him into on-level for second semester. And at the end of second semester, he and his English teacher came to us and he said, you know, I see the difference. I understand the difference. I feel like I made growth in the areas I needed to make growth in. I want to come back to honors next year. I'm not going to say no to a kid self-advocating for honors. Plus, I like teaching him and he was going to be in my class again. So we did. We moved him. And honestly, he pulled C's in the honors class. But the dedication to his work and his ability to work was amazing. He was the other captain of the drum line. He was a year younger than Kobe, so he took over as first captain when Kobe graduated. And the work that he did for us, you could see the growth, you could see the improvement. He ended up pulling a full scholarship to Johnson C. Smith University for his drumming. The other thing I saw in Khalil was the compassion. He was amazing for his empathy for peers. He had lost his father his freshman year of high school, which had also had a huge impact on had a huge impact on life. I mean, I can't over explain enough how hard that was for him. But what I saw was when we had other students who were struggling, when we had other students, we had one student who was losing their grandfather, who was one of their primary caregivers, and his ability to step in and take those peers and cry with them even. I'm gonna tear up now because it was such an amazing moment to watch. Um, it showed where all of his strength and his giftedness and his growth was. Well, Maggie, share it then. So I'm gonna put her on the spot. One of our participants was actually his one of his teachers as well. Maggie said she's sick, but yeah, his self-esteem and his ability to stretch himself and his willingness to put himself out there was just absolutely amazing. And you can come talk about him another week. So I did see we had a question about how does this compare to other schools? We were the best. Just gonna say. In some ways, it was hard to compare to other schools because our other two programs, one is at Walter Johnson. And I will say that the Walter Johnson program makes the profile of the school. Walter Johnson also has a very different model, and they have, or still have, I want to say they have like 5 special ed programs in the school. So pulling some numbers were more difficult. And because they have what was Asperger's, what is now Connections, they had a whole nother student group with a very similar profile. So sometimes there's so much overlap, especially in high school, between the programs. Sometimes there were kids who were in the Asperger's program who very easily could have been kids in our program. And for whatever reason, they were in whatever program they were in. I think if you put both of the programs together and then did that measure, they would have still continued to pretty much match what Walter Johnson is as a school. Watkins Mill is our other area, and the current case manager at Watkins Mill is doing a study similar to this one. She started it in this class as her project last semester, and she's continuing that work now. The hard part with Watkins Mill is that they are a significantly smaller program, whereas we started with 14 and got ourselves, Maggie, correct me, I think we got ourselves to 44 at one point. Watkins Mill was at like 7 or 8, and the largest they've ever been in my time it's been about 15. Up County is different, and I don't know why, but it is really hard for us to pull numbers for a lot of the programs, but specifically Twice Exceptional, it is really hard for us to pull numbers up there. And so when we're looking at 8 students in a school of 1,700, it's really hard to say what that makeup really looks like, because I think we had 1 African-American student, we had 1 Latina student, we had 2 multiracial students. So did they make it up? Yeah, but it's hard to draw as hard of a conclusion. Now that Watkins Mill also has the regional IB program, we're actually doing work with our IB people to ask that question, but ask it broadly as far as who's coming into the regional IB, as well as who's already at Watkins Mill, as well as who is already or coming into our program, a part of our program. And I understand that sounds also a little bit like a cop-out answer, and that's possibly because, like I said, we're still in the middle of pulling the data right now. Right now, I think our program is 14, so now that's where we were at Northwood when we started, and that seems to be a good-ish number to start really diving in, because you have the opportunity to have more than 1 student represent any particular racial category. Whew. Stop for a second. So it's 8 o'clock. My mouth is very dry. So I'm going to have us do our 5-minute break, even though I know we started late today. I am probably going to go just a little bit over tonight to like 9:05 or so, since we did start late. but if you've got to sign off at 9, I understand. So it's now 8:01. If we want to plan to be back at 8:06, is 5 minutes enough for everyone? If it's not enough, turn off your camera and don't tell me, it's fine. All right, I'm gonna hit pause. All right, so welcome back. So I want to continue talking a little bit about definitions, and really, I feel like it's a good way to kind of work ourselves around through some different topics. When we talk about the world of gifted, we talk about special populations. And so special populations are defined as populations that are rare or small parts. I'm reading this, that's why. Rare or small parts of the overall population, such as twice exceptional learners, profoundly gifted, which are the top 1% of learners of giftedness, underrepresented populations, including but not limited to those who are from cultural, linguistic, ethnically diverse backgrounds, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning plus, twice exceptional gifted children or gifted children with disabilities, the highly and profoundly gifted, those experiencing the impact of gender issues, those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and those who are impacted by geographic issues, such as those who are in urban or rural settings. So obviously Special Pops covers a large array of very, very small populations. It's interesting also because within NAGC, which again is our professional organization, each of those different groups actually has their own special interest group. So I chair the twice exceptional group. We have an LGBTQ group. We have a highly profoundly gifted group. We also have what we call a network, which is the Special Populations Network. And unlike all of the other special interest groups and networks who have no affiliation with each other, for Special Pops, we treat our network as an umbrella for all of our smaller organizations, because we know that there's power in numbers. And so while I don't always have stuff in common with, say, those in a rural setting, there are twice exceptional kids in rural settings. But more importantly, I know if I stand with other populations, that they will stand with me when we need extra voices. And part of the world of being in special populations is that we are that we need the support because we are being missed often in a general conversation. Now, there is a difference between special populations and underrepresented populations. So underrepresented populations specifically are considered to be populations that are underrepresented due to outside forces, such as social barriers, including race and ethnicity, rural populations, English language learners, and students impacted by poverty. Underrepresented populations are special populations because they require different methods of identification to accurately identify students appropriately for access. These populations are also more likely to have students who do not have equal access to the gifted curriculum in their area or fall under missingness, meaning that they should have been identified but were not. So, and I will talk, missingness is a whole topic we can get into, but the official gifted equity definition of missingness are when we look at a population, such as what we did with Northwood, we said our school is 23% or whatever it was African-American, our program should be 23% African-American, give or take a couple of percentage points. So the difference between what we had and what we should be was our missing population. And yes, there's somebody who's done research and there's mathematical formulas that they use for that. But as I've said multiple times, I don't math unless I really have to, and I have to sit down and think about it very, very hard. For my purposes, I think it's enough to say we're missing a whole lot of kids. One of the readings that you guys will have access to is, it's called System Failure, Access Denied. It was a report done by Purdue University and others, where they looked specifically at the lack of access to gifted instruction nationally and then also by state. So you will get to see the executive summary. What I did is I pulled for you guys the executive summary link, which is 3 or 4 pages of the whole report. I pulled the national report card and the Maryland report card. And then if you'd like to read the 200-page report, there's a link for that too. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't read the 200-page report. I don't focus that well. But I do click through different parts of it, and it's something that, you know, if you're looking for specific information, it's really great to get in there and find some of those specific details. When you look at the Maryland report card, it is very, very interesting because there's a lot of evidence of both under identification and not under identification. A big part of that reason is because Baltimore City and Prince George's County both do amazing jobs of identification, and they are very, very cognizant of identifying what are traditionally underrepresented populations. They have multiple ways of identifying their learners. The other thing that is missing in this report is that the data here was pulled, I think, in 2015, and it was in 2016-17 that MCPS changed the way that we do gifted identification. So there is a huge shift in numbers for us that are not evident in the report card that's on there. So I usually get asked that question, like, why do we suck so much? We did suck so much. We suck a whole lot less now. And that has a lot to do with going from that parent and teacher driven process to the universal screening process. And the data from that universal screening process is not captured in this report. So I think a lot of times we do. Now we're gonna erase that, backtrack, I'm gonna start again. There is a whole new world. There's always a new world, right? There's a whole new world in the world of twice exceptional that we call 3E or thrice exceptional. I think thrice exceptional sounds weird. I prefer 3E. So what 3E is, well, let me make it even more complex. 3E is looking at a student who is gifted, who is one of the underrepresented populations, and is also twice exceptional. Now, there's 2 schools of thought on what thrice exceptional really looks like, because there's also a lot of data to show that students who are African American or Latino with no disability, but they are gifted, are as equally underrepresented as any other gifted student with a disability. So what Dr. Moore's research showed was, I'm sorry, Dr. Bonner's research showed was that being Black was essentially a disability when it comes, statistically speaking, for identification purposes. Please hear, I did not say that being Black is a disability. I said that when it comes to the identification of being gifted, Black students and Latino students are under-identified at the same rate as special education students. But when we look at it, those are with Black and Latino students who do not have disabilities. So Dr. Bonner posits that twice exceptional can also mean gifted and impacted by gender, race, socioeconomic status, class, culture, ethnicity. I 100% hear the argument. I understand the argument. For the purpose of what I'm talking about, I am not talking specifically about that research. I linked his articles in here. You can easily fall down a rabbit hole. It's really, really interesting information. My concern is that if we use twice exceptional to discuss this topic, and we use twice exceptional to discuss students with disabilities, my fear is the overlap that people will start to hear, that a lot more Black and brown students have disabilities than they actually do. So when I'm talking about the population in terms of this information, I am specifically speaking about students who have been identified or should be identified as gifted and have identified disabilities and have a social impact such as race, gender, class, culture, ethnicity. Yes, Gina.
So My question is, so our numbers are getting better, and I mean, we're doing a lot to reach out more as far as and what we're doing within our schools. But our numbers are still not matching COMAR standards. So how do we get to that point where we are? Because the numbers still aren't comparable. And it seems like part of it is we know that part of it is socioeconomic. But we have this other part that is access and just the lack of knowing that these things are available for a child from a family's perspective. So then that's where a gen ed teacher then, you know, becomes a caseworker and like and needs to be, but that's a very big hat. So so what do we do then? How do we wear that hat in addition?
So great questions and complicated answer. So complicated answer number one, we don't meet COMAR within our subpopulations, but what COMAR actually says is of the count of the school district population. So we do meet COMAR. We know as good learners, as good teachers, as good advocates, that just because the district meets it doesn't mean that we meet it by subgroup. And so AEI has specifically charged ourselves with meeting by subgroup, but that is not what COMAR says. We just know that that's good practice and best practice. So like I said, that's complicated answer number one. Complicated answer number two is, for better or for worse, because gifted identification does not lead to programming in MCPS, it's an identifier, but it's not a marker. You don't have to be identified as gifted to get into any program. When we consider students for programs, whether or not you've been identified as gifted is not one of those considerations. So there is a little bit of a break. So like in Prince George's County, you cannot get into any of their school-based, regional, or countywide gifted magnet programs unless you're identified as gifted. In MCPS, that's not true. The merits of that system we can discuss on another date, but for now, it's not true. So that leads to like that third piece that you asked about really, which is access. And access is really the most important part, in my opinion, because access is the actual education of the child and not just the pretty little gold flag next to their name and performance matters. So where teachers, and especially gen ed teachers, can be the advocate and be the voice for their students comes in a couple of ways. One of them is when we look at the makeup of our classes. And if you talk as a department, look at the makeup of your class or your honors program, look at honors chemistry, number 3 or whatever it is across your classroom, and then look at your school population. Does it match? Is it close? Why or why not? For our younger, well, I'll jump off an elementary one in a second. If it doesn't match, what can you do to help it match? Do you need to offer not remedial, but extra time for support? Would a student do better if they had more opportunities for enrichment? Can we offer electives where they have the opportunity to learn more about programming so they could take the AP computer science classes? You know, what can you do to help fill in that gap? Another way I think you can look at it is, what opportunity would a wealthy family have for their child that would help bridge this gap? And then how can we offer that something similar within the classroom? I think that's where, again, electives are a huge benefit. I know that there is an African American history class that's being offered at middle school now, because one of the gaps we saw and that we know of is that when students don't feel included in the curriculum, they're not going to pay attention. So by offering this African American history course, it's always full, it's hard to get into, and the kids absolutely love it. But because they love it, they're learning more writing skills, they're learning more academic reading skills, and they're able to pull themselves up so that when we consider for other advanced courses, it's a whole nother time in the day that they're getting access to these skills, but it's not boring and it's not remedial. So that becomes one of those questions in there. I have my own personal opinions about things we could do centrally. I'd love to see us offer summer electives that are fun and interesting. We had great response when we offered it during the pandemic, and I would like to see us offer more of that. As a county, I lost that vote too. Not that anyone asked my opinion, but I lost the vote. But that really, and then also, what are we doing for after school activities that again can bring in our students' interest and bring them into that school community more tightly so that they develop friends and they develop opportunities to thrive. On the elementary side of this, it's even more important. I know one question that we get, or one comment that we get very frequently, is our 4th and 5th grade compacted math and 4th and 5th grade ELC classes. Principals will say, it's only white kids in there. It's overwhelmingly, white and Asian students in the classes. And my question for those principals, which is usually when they stop speaking to me, is, well, yes, kids come in with a certain level of readiness, but you had them kindergarten to 4th grade. What did you do in those 4 years to help prepare them to be ready for, if we know that students who are white, Asian, or of a higher socioeconomic status are coming to the building ready, what can we do? What are we offering? Are we giving them opportunities to not say, oh, they didn't do their work, they don't get to do enrichment? Are we rather pushing them, well, let's try enrichment first and see what happens? Are we giving them opportunities for creative and critical thinking? Are we creating after school clubs, even at the elementary level, that kids could be involved in and stretch their skills and have those opportunities? I know it's a great thing that we have now elementary coding classes that are offered after school. And in our Title I schools, you have the opportunity to have them funded, which is really, really helpful. But what are we doing in those grades so that when that list comes out of who is being recommended for the courses, have we done everything we should do and could do in order to prepare the students who are not coming in with advantage to be on that playing field? And there are things that we can do, like I said, using best practices that we know of in talent development and best practices in using strength-based instruction and enrichment models. We can make that difference, but we have to have the support from our administration to do it, and we have to have the knowledge on how to do it. Was that a complicated enough, complex enough answer?
Great answer. Thank you.
I never give easy answers. I give long-winded soapbox answers.
There are no easy answers to this.
Well, I mean, if they would just let me do what I want to do and pay for it, I could fix it.
There you go.
I mean, the problem is power and money. If I had both, I could fix a lot of problems. That's the 3rd time I've said that today. And yeah, I got laughed at for all of those ones too.
Love it. Thank you.
So
you got my vote.
Sarah, for in charge of the school system, God, no, wouldn't that be horrible? All the politics to get there now. So Estella, great question. And specifically for this question, no, the lack of psychologists and other professionals is not part of the problem, because we don't use psychologists to determine gifted identity large scale, because that's a lot. We would have to employ psychology. We screen 8,000 to 10,000 kids a year, if not more. Nobody's asking school psychologists or any psychologists to write that many reports, do that many WISCs. It's hurting us when it comes to being able to identify kids in the special education pathway who have not had cognitives done because there aren't an educational or emotional, there aren't educational impacts, academic impacts suspected. I feel like, yes, if we had a school psychologist at every school and that they could be dedicated to their schools and provide both the social emotional support and the testing support for each of the schools, that would go a long way in the world of twice exceptional. But in terms of evening out the balance for gifted identification, I don't feel like it would have as much of an impact because it's not part of where the primary problems are right now. It would be good, but it wouldn't fix the problem. Yes. Dorley.
I was gonna say that the same could be said for more special education teachers in schools. If we had enough of those, we would be able to provide more of those supports and everything you just mentioned, and change the system from that perspective. But we don't, and it's all funding and all that stuff. But
Absolutely. And yeah. Oh, that's so defeating. It's okay. We're going to keep going. I can't solve all the problems, but I can give lots of solutions if anyone wants to listen to the answers. So yeah, so overall, so now we've talked about this concept of 3E. So 2E, 3E, same population, except our thrice exceptional or our 3E students are students who are also in those underrepresented populations. If you have about $100 lying around and nothing else to do, there is the national, what is it called? The National Symposium on Equity for Black and Brown Gifted Students. It is an online symposium where you get to hear a lot of people who know a lot more than I do. Mostly, if you look at all the names on my list here of what's in the module, it's basically all of them speaking live and answering questions and talking even more up to date. I will post the information in the course under announcements. But you can sign up for the online conference now, and it is it's a lot of fun. I go almost every year. I can't go this year. I mean, I could buy it and watch the recordings later, but I am what's the word, training on those days. Get to teach, which is fun, but I get to miss the symposium as well. So the next group that I want to talk about a little more closely is our gifted EMLs. So our gifted emergent multilingual learners. And with zero offense to anybody, I might say ESL, I might say EML, I might say ESOL. I mean, no disrespect. It's just a lot of letters and a lot of changes in the last few years. So I am just trying my best to keep up. But just so we know, I am speaking of our emergent multilingual learners. Emergent multilingual learners are the most underidentified group in Montgomery County and in Maryland. They are significantly underidentified whether or not they have a disability, period. This is a problem, period. There's no easy solution. Are we surprised? Oh, good, we're not surprised. So one of the issues with identifying our emergent multilingual learners, well, some of the issues, I shouldn't say one, but some of the issues are, even though most of the assessments that we give are nonverbal, meaning that you don't have to know any language in order to do the majority of the testing, the reality is you need to understand the context of American education. You need to understand the context of directions. We are in a setting, in a situation now where the assessments that we are using are currently offered in 2 languages. They're or 3 languages. They're offered in English, French, and Spanish. We do have means for using language support or language line to get directions to students who are not French and English speaking. We are in a constant discussion with Riverside. So Riverside does the WJ series, they do the COGAT, they do a lot of things. They're a big testing group. Every year I talk to them, things get a little bit better. They very much hide from me when I come over to the booth at the convention every year. But whether or not you speak English should not determine whether or not you are gifted. And in fact, by nature of just learning multiple languages and being educated in multiple languages, you're using a lot of energy, a lot of brain cells, and that needs to be credited for what it is. So how do we identify emergent multilingual learners who are not fluent in English? One of the pieces that we need to look at and that we don't do the best job of is looking at growth. So one thing that we did this year for our 4th and 5th grade ELC classes, when we put out recommendations, a new recommendation that we gave this year was for schools to look at not what level of English the emergent multilingual learners were at, but how much growth they had in the last year. If they jumped more than, and I might get some of these words wrong, but on the Access or WIDA test, whichever one it is they're taking, if they jumped more than 2 levels, if they gained more than X number of points, if we have EML students who were in the 1st or 2nd percentile on the MAP-R at the beginning of the year, and they were, say, in the 40th or 50th percentile at the end of the year, even though I know in MAP we usually look spring to spring, summer, fall, fall, winter, winter. If you grew 40 points on the map between the fall and the spring, that is significant growth. And so we started giving guidelines this year about ways to look at our students differently based on their growth in learning English and not just their actual performance in English. Because students who can achieve that much growth in a single year are showing us that there's some form of readiness. And if the growth that they're showing us is the ability to communicate in the language that most of their instruction is happening in, that is significant information. We also have started in, and any of you guys who are 4th or 5th grade teachers can hopefully attest to this. In our curriculum for advanced learners, we have been working with our they're not EML, the ELD, DELMI people, our English language development friends. We have been working with them, and we've been working with people outside of MCPS in the field to identify 2 different things. One are scaffolds and accommodations that are specific to EML learners. And the other, and this is a lot of the work that I do when it comes to curriculum, is identifying supports and scaffolds and modifications that are appropriate for both EML and twice exceptional learners. Because one thing I know, having been in the classroom, is if I have to modify it twice, I'm not going to modify it at all. But if I can modify it in the same or a very similar way for all of my people, you're much more likely to get changes and modifications as needed. I was really lucky in my first year in high school that I had a highly gifted learner in my English class, in my Honors English 9 class. And my student did not have a disability. She was a French speaker who had moved to the US. And for better or for worse, she was exited out of her ESOL courses because she passed the test. That's awesome, right? The problem is that her confidence in reading and writing did not translate to her confidence in speaking. And if you know anything about English 9, there's a lot of speaking. And in fact, at that time, there was a lot of performance with Shakespeare and other pieces. And there was also a lot of poetry, which meant a lot of metaphors and things that are not necessarily clear to our EML students. And so we found very quickly that our student tried to kind of withdraw into herself, but she also started to doubt herself because I mean, we all knew she was smart. We could see it in her, everything she did. But when she suddenly stepped into this honors English class where we're reading, higher level books at a faster pace, she really started to doubt herself as a learner, which is something that we see very commonly in twice exceptional kids as well. They understand the concept, but their reading skills are not as strong as their peers. And when you step back and think about it, whether you're not reading on grade level because you have a reading disability or because it's not a language that you understand, either way, you're having trouble with the words on the page. So what else can we do? We can encourage a lot of discussion. We can have group work. We can do more reading aloud. There's a lot of different techniques we could use. And so working with our student, we also would ask her, like, what can we do that will make things more accessible for you? And frequently it was stuff that we were planning to do with our twice exceptional learners as well. And so at the end of the day, it comes back to that same mantra, strength-based instruction. What are their strengths? What are they good at? And how do we capitalize on those strengths in order to help their performance? Other non-traditional characteristics that we will see in EML learners that are potential signs of giftedness, they tend to be risk takers. Not that they're burning the building down, not those risk takers. They're more likely to attempt to use vocabulary, whether or not it's right. They are more likely to try it. They are more likely to try their academic vocabulary. They're more likely to engage in conversations, provide answers. If they're shy but risk takers, they're more likely to write down their answers. They're more likely to ask the teacher to come over to listen to what they're asking or have to say. They do tend to interact more with their peers. And one thing that also always stands out to me is we have to stop looking at just English and history in those classes. We need to see what they're doing in math and science as well. One of my very favorite examples was way back long ago when I was substitute teaching. I had a student who, I was walking down the hall and they stopped me and said, "Hey, could you do AP chemistry?" We all know how that's going to go, right? And I said, "Sure, of course, I can do anything." So I go into the AP Chem class. The teacher was sick and just needed coverage so that he could go home. And he said, "We're calculating moles, but it's okay. You just keep them alive. I can handle keeping kids alive." But I vaguely remember moles, like, 10 to the 23rd power, blah, 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 something like that. I was like, we can figure this out. So I look at the work and I'm talking it through with the class, and I put a problem on the board. And I say, "I think this is how you do it." And I have these two girls in the front and they're just back and forth in Spanish. And then they would kind of look at me and then they would go back and forth in Spanish. And I'm like, I'm not doing any better in English. So what am I going to say? And then eventually the one girl raises her hand and she said, "Miss, we think you got it wrong." And I said, "Oh, I'm pretty sure I got it wrong, but what do you guys think?" And so the one girl basically teaches the class in Spanish and her friend translates what she's saying and they figured it out. I was good at writing numbers on the board. But the moral of the story was, don't assume that because they're not explaining in English that you know better than they do or that they don't know what they're saying. It's a small example and it's a helpful example just in that it wasn't my class. I had no attachment to the curriculum. So the idea that the child raised her hand and said you did it wrong was no skin off my nose. I pretty much announced I did it wrong. But it's going to be a lot harder when it's their regular teacher or a situation where they're not feeling safe to make those kinds of comments. Whether we're talking about our twice exceptional kids or our EMLs, allowing them to speak in a language that is comfortable for them, to process out what they should be doing, where their work is going, we have to make room for it. One of my techniques for twice exceptional learners was when I gave directions, my kids were going to talk, right? They're all going to talk. They never stop talking. So how do we make their talking more, helpful? So we would give an assignment. And the first thing we would actually say is, guys, read the assignment. I'm not going to read it to you unless that was their accommodation. And we're going to come back and answer questions. So right away, we would give them ownership of the assignment to go over what it was they were looking for. Then we would answer questions. Then we would go through expectations, where we would start and whatever our lesson would be for the day. And then we would say to them, if you want to work in silence, you're going to go to that corner. If you want to work and talk, you're going to go to that corner. And if you need to talk it out, you're going to go to that corner, or usually out in the hallway at that point because it was high school. And we would say, do what you need to do to figure it out, because we had some kids who just wanted to get started. And we had some kids who were going to talk regardless of whether or not I asked them not to talk. But if you talk and work at the same time, I mean, it's like parallel play, right? Or was it called the buddy system? During the pandemic, I know Ashley and I would get onto Zoom like this, and we wouldn't talk to each other, but we would be on Zoom the whole time. As accountability partner, that was the word I heard recently. It was somebody that I could talk to if I wanted to. It was somebody else who was just near me working, and I would get my work done. And then I had my kids who just had to say, wait, did they say what? What was this? How did you hear this? It's not that they needed me to answer their questions. Sometimes they just had to ask their questions and then they would answer them themselves, or they would talk over top of each other, or they would share information with each other. But really, at the end of the day, it was that opportunity to allow our students to do what they did most comfortably, which also meant that our students who spoke other languages could talk to their peers to make sure they understood the assignment. And I think that like the benefit in that is just, it's so important. Sorry, my mind drifts sometimes. I was actually thinking about a time that I was in Russia and I had been learning Russian, and I was so excited to count out my change at one of the tables. And the girl was so excited to see I was American, and she counted back to me in English, and then I counted to her in Russian, and we did it a couple of times just to make sure that we were both on the same page. Because like it was the first time like a real Russian person other than my teacher had spoken like numbers, which should be something fairly simple, but she was so excited to speak English to somebody. And at the time it was like 6,000 rubles to $1. So there was like a lot of math language involved. And, you know, just being given that space where neither of us was going to make fun of the other one was so important. And at the end of the day, you know, we got done what we needed to do. And we need to do the same thing for our kids in the same way that, you know, when we go to teaching things and we want to talk to each other, or we have PLCs where we talk to each other, we have to give our kids those opportunities too. And that is where we're also going to give our EML learners a chance to shine. So we are coming a little bit close to the end. I definitely want to answer questions for people. I have not talked about LGBTQ plus and gender issues because I have a call out to an expert in the field who does guest speaking, and I am waiting to hear back from her. So my hope is that she will be here next week to give us that talk. And frankly, there's so much new information. I have not had a time to do a good job of digesting it. And there's so little information on LGBTQ and twice exceptional that's published that all I feel like I have right now is a lot of anecdotal information. I will tell you just broadly, giftedness occurs more in a greater percentage and more frequently in the LGBTQ population than in the heterosexual population. Some of the theory for that is that some of those things that make gifted learners, resiliency, creative thinking, willingness to take risk, willingness to think outside the box, are partly what part of the experience that LGBTQ plus people go through in their life experience. And so if you're living the experience that often mirrors what we try to teach in gifted education, you're going to show more in that population. Non-binary students tend to be gifted at a higher rate percentage-wise than if you're not non-binary, are you binary? That sounds right.
Cisgender.
There you go. Thank you. So in cisgender population, we tend to be 50-50, pretty much on the nose with very little fluctuation. I can tell you from the numbers that I pulled recently in MCPS, we are 50%, our gifted population is, our male female population is about 50-50, and our non-binary population is 76% gifted. Now, are they a smaller number? They are. And these are also kids who have actually identified as non-binary as middle schoolers in the MCPS system. However, it's still 76% of non-binary middle schoolers are identified as gifted. Even in a small population, I think that's a significant information to have. And it's information that continues to play out as more research is being done. Just like within the general LGBTQ population, our gifted LGBTQ students are more at risk for suicidal ideation, suicidal behaviors, and self-harm. We see a lot of anxiety in the population. It's hard to ascribe it as part of giftedness because we know how prevalent it is in the general population, which is why I want an expert to be able to come in and speak to us on it, because I feel like that is going to be a much more genuine conversation, and it's her area of expertise and research. And the last piece I think I would share on that is just looking at what my Twice Exceptional program looks like right now. Like when parents ask me what the gender makeup is, because as we know, we tend to over-identify boys, parents will ask me what the gender makeup of our different schools are. And I do not answer that question for high school because my high schoolers are so fluid across the board right now that I don't think we can give a fair answer. And that's what I tell parents, is that it's a very fluid population. And so out of respect to who they have expressed themselves to be, it's a very fluid population and we're not going to identify. Yes, Hannah.
So in some of the modules, there was information about gifted adults. So I'm just wondering, does giftedness occur in LGBTQ adults more than their counterparts in the adult population? I'm asking because I was a GSA sponsor at my previous school, and it seems a lot of my kids were gifted. And the sense that I got was that because they were so gifted, so intelligent, they just had a better idea of who they were as people. And that they have a lot of peers who I think later on in life might also realize they're part of the LGBT community, but just hadn't yet. And that might be what we're seeing. So is there research on the correlating phenomenon in adults?
So I don't read as much about adults because adults don't interest me. What you're saying, I have read as part of the, oh, I like that. Somebody just told me the principal calls them population fluid. I like that. Yes, what the research that and the most recent research I really read was coming out about 2018-19, when NAGC actually published a thing on, it's not quite a book because it's skinny, but it was a whole thing on LGBTQ students. That is a lot of what they saw, that because they are exploring who they are within their world, within their population, within their lives, that introspection allows them to understand who they are. So we go back to that metacognition, right? They're not just learning about how they learn, but they're learning about who they are. And sometimes that forces them to grow up a little more quickly, and it also allows them to develop more quickly and make those creative connections, make those critical thinking connections, which are all identifiers of giftedness. I apologize for the 3 children that are about to come barreling up the steps. There's one. So it wouldn't surprise me if that would play out. There's 2. And it wouldn't surprise me if that plays out, that yes, as adults, is it more likely that we find gifted people who suddenly realize that they fall within the LGBTQ community? Possibly. Or maybe that they knew and didn't outwardly identify. But now. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I have a 7-year-old. All right, go away.
Almost 7.
Almost 7.
Nope. Guys, out. Out. Theodore, no.
Yep, got all 3 of them. I don't mind children. I see all the children pop up. It makes me happy. I did, like I said, when it comes to the adult population, I definitely don't feel as comfortable discussing what that looks like. What you're saying is things I've definitely heard. I'm a member of the LGBT. It's so weird. In NAGC, they're actually the GLBTQA. I don't know why they are, but they are. I'm a member of their network, so I get a lot of information from them specifically because I want to learn more. And I think also I would bring it back to, we are trying to do a better job having more representation within our instruction and our literature within the school system. And so I think that as kids are seeing themselves more in literature, they're better able to identify who they are and express who they are. And then in the long run, that gives us better data because, like I said, like I can tell you 76% of our middle schoolers who are non-binary identify as gifted, but that number is like 12 or 15 kids. It increases a little bit every year, but until I have a population like I do of cisgender, which is the other 30,000, it's sometimes hard to extrapolate specifics. But I'm really hoping we'll have Teresa here next week, and that is, I will be taking notes as fast and furiously as all you guys do, because like it's definitely an area that I know I need to learn more about. Outside of LGBTQ+, we also want to just consider when it comes with gender also how, the fact that we know that girls are underrepresented when it comes to identification of autism and ADHD. We know that they present differently and that their needs are different. As I think I've said in a previous class, I am one of the few girls I know who presents as the way boys do when they have ADHD. So I'm not a good example. And I gave birth to one of them. So we are not a good example over here. But there is specific research around it. And that Matt Fugate, who has the speech on there from my previous class that you guys might want to look at, his area of expertise is actually girls with ADHD and their different needs, their different identification and how they perform. And then, as I've said multiple times, we know that Black and brown boys are grossly over-identified for behaviors and emotional disabilities and grossly under-identified for giftedness and gifted behaviors and gifted opportunities. And so I get in trouble for saying this all the time, but I feel very strongly that if we have a precocious acting out Latino or African-American male, and we are thinking about coding or looking at them for IEPs, we've got to do cognitive testing, which is not what the psychology people say. And I understand why it's a lot of work, but I feel like if we want to disrupt the system, then we have to disrupt our approach. So gender issues within gifted do have to do with our students who are non-binary, but then our students who are cisgender also have gender related issues. And there are some good, I have some good podcasts on here. Specifically, I have one on gifted girls with social connections and self-care. And the other one is on gifted boys and how sometimes the mask of masculinity can impact their ability to show where their gifts are and interact. It touches everything within their interactions. So I think I didn't hit publish. Okay, I just published that page, so you guys have some information now. It says module 13, just ignore that. That's because it used to be module 13. It's now part of module 3. Yes. So as always, I said that I was going to stop a little early so we could ask questions. And as always, I took it right almost till 9 o'clock. So I'm happy if you guys have any questions that you want to ask on the recording that I can answer. And then I will also pause or turn off the recording and answer any questions that people might have. I do have my usual 10-minute limit because at this point I need to drive that one home. But do we have any questions for the good of the order?
Yes, I was wondering, where can we find, I know last class you shared the final project information, but when I was on the page, I could not find it.
It is definitely not because I forgot to post it. I swear that is not at all why it's not up there. It would be so helpful if somebody would shoot me an email first thing tomorrow morning, like 5 of you did this morning, and remind me to do it first thing so that I don't forget between here and there, because I'm going to forget again. I don't not love you guys. I just haven't posted that. The recording I have tried to post 3 or 4 times and Candace keeps rejecting it. So I'm going to try one more time before I leave Ashley's tonight. And if I can't do it, I'll try again in the morning. You might be able to see it in the files. If you go under the files for the course and then it says weekly videos, and it's the only one that isn't named by the date. Yeah, I don't like posting myself on YouTube because it makes me weird and self-conscious, but that is my like way backup plan is to put it up on my YouTube channel, where you can also see things like little cartoons I made about creative thinking and types of conflict in literature, because that's what I do when I get bored. I make videos. Any other questions I can answer for anyone? Thank you, Hannah. All right, well, I will turn off the recording then.